This happened about 13 years ago, when I was a sophomore in college, attending a liberal arts school in Suffolk County, New York. Within the first month or two of freshman year, I had found myself in a very tight-knit group of fellow theatre geeks, 6 guys, myself included, and 1 girl. And they all loved horror movies and ghost stories. I had found my crew. Freshman year was tough, but we all held each other up and made the whole experience more enjoyable for one another. At the beginning of sophomore year, we decided that in October, as the Halloween season was ramping up, we would find a creepy, wooded spot in a nearby town some night and scare the crap out of ourselves. We did some research and found that there was a particularly isolated area about 30 minutes away, infamous for paranormal sightings. Perfect. The 7 of us split into 2 different cars and headed out into the night. Allow me to set the scene. You turn off a busy main road, flooded with strip malls and restaurants and whatnot, and you're almost immediately greeted by complete darkness. Again, this area was very heavily wooded. It was essentially a large web of winding roads surrounded by trees, very few streetlights and very few houses. Without a GPS or a good sense of direction, one could easily get lost in there. We all made sure to have fully charged phones and flashlights, just in case. But the goal was to keep driving until we collectively decided to pull over and go exploring. So per the directions, we made a left off of the main road, driving for 30 minutes or so into this dark network, picking directions at random, just getting intentionally lost. Our cars made a turn and, to our surprise, there was a huge log in front of us. We had reached a dead end of some kind, with nothing but trees beyond it. We all got out to see what exactly this was, stepped over the log, and noticed 2 narrow trails leading in different directions. This seemed like as good a time as any to grab our flashlights and do some amateur ghost hunting. We flipped a coin and set off on the trail to the right. The trail was so narrow that we had to walk single file to avoid getting whacked by branches. For whatever reason, I ended up in the back. I'm usually pretty rational and level-headed, but I have to say, the further we went in, the more I was overcome with an uneasy feeling. I kept hearing sounds deep in the woods, unable to shake the feeling we were being watched. But I seemed to be the only one who heard these things, so I shrugged it off as my imagination. And in any case, the whole point of us being there was to get scared, not to mention the fact that we were 7 able-bodied college students. What would we come across that could take us down? We headed down this trail for about 20 minutes, and just when I thought it would never end, we came to a massive clearing. And I mean massive. It was a large open field of unkempt grass, comparable in scope to a golf course, but not nearly as well manicured. Trees surrounded the entire field, which was so large we could not see the end of it from where we were standing. I was thrilled to get out of that narrow trail, but I don't think any of us were expecting to find an area so vast.
Hey, check that out.
We all turned, and there was an old, dilapidated house several hundred yards away. The house was completely dark, with no cars or signs of anyone actually living there. We walked over and shined our flashlights at it, and sure enough, the windows and doors were all boarded up. I managed to peer between the boards on one of the windows, and what I could see was an old white couch covered in plastic, but an otherwise empty room. Whoever used to live here, they were long gone. Because there was no way in, and because we all felt sufficiently creeped out by the house anyway, we decided to walk closer to the trail we had come in from, have a seat in the field, and figure out where to go next. We walked towards the narrow trail, but before we could sit, my friend Mark stopped what he was doing. His expression dropped and he pointed. We all turned, and on a very far side of the field, directly across from where we had come in, we could see someone tall, lanky and pale dancing among the trees. And by dancing, I mean it was skipping around, grabbing a tree, swinging around it, and then doing the same to another tree. Basically a do-si-do. The moon was so bright and the woods so dark, it actually took a second for us to really understand what we were looking at. Jay, the 6'4" skeptic of the group, wasn't seeing it. I leaned into him, pointed in that direction, and said, "Jay, look where I'm pointing. Don't you see that?" He squinted a bit, and the second that he saw it, he gasped with everything he had, clutched my arm and whispered,
What the fuck is that?
What happened next sent shockwaves through all of us. Whoever this was, they stopped dancing, looked in our direction, and started charging straight at us. Without even thinking, we freaked and ran back to the trail. Yet again, Jay was the only one who didn't see what was happening. He shouted after us.
Guys, what is it? Where are you going?
After about 15 seconds of running like hell, I heard Jay scream,
Holy shit!
I looked back and saw his flashlight following the rest of us into the trail. While the walk into the woods took about 20 minutes, we made it back to our 2 cars, hopped in and were peeling away in closer to 5. Once we were a safe distance away, we pulled over, got out and checked in with each other about what just happened. My heart was pounding and I know everyone else was feeling the same way. Nearly 15 years later, we are all still friends, living in different states, yet keeping in touch through marriages, divorces, children, etc. But occasionally, out of the blue, one of us will send a group text to the others with something to the effect of,
The woods? That really happened, right?
"It most certainly did." That experience is always in the back of my mind, and I'm pretty sure it always will be. Here's the thing that still resonates with me about that night. Whoever that was, they were dancing maniacally in the woods at 1 a.m, and then ran directly for a group of young adults, not at all fazed by the fact that they were severely outnumbered. Did he know we were there from the second we parked? Was he the sound that I kept hearing when we walked the trail? Whatever the case may be, when he came for us that night, you can be sure none of us wanted to stick around and see what he was truly capable of. I was about 11 when this happened. My older cousin Daniel, about 13, and I were playing hide and seek outside in my grandmother's yard. She owned a large farm in Tennessee, just over 1,000 acres, and I grew up there my entire life. So did Daniel. So it was nothing for us to wander off and play in areas that probably weren't very safe for the average kid. But we knew the property like the back of our hand. It just so happened that the day before this happened, a lot of trees were cut down to make room for a new mobile home by the roadside that she intended to rent out for extra income. Daniel and I naturally gravitated toward this new, unfamiliar landscape to play because it was something new to explore. All of the trees had been stripped of their branches and placed in logging trucks and hauled off. The branches, however, were all piled in a tangled mess about 50 feet wide and 12 to 15 feet tall. They were packed so densely that you couldn't see through them from one side to the other. It was during about the half-hour mark when it was my turn to find Daniel that I began to suspect that he was hiding in the woods, deeper than our stated rules allowed. I remember calling his name for several minutes and hearing nothing but a quiet giggle coming from the woods. I was in the newly cut clearing looking into the woods and getting more upset by the minute. Finally, I announced as loudly as I could that if he wasn't going to play fairly, then I was going in to get a glass of tea and watch television with Grandma. I started back up the hill towards the house. It was at the moment I was walking past the brush pile, basically centered beside it, that I heard an unfamiliar voice. "You gave up quickly." I stopped. I called out, "Daniel?" It didn't sound like Daniel, but the voice responded, "Yes, I am Daniel. I am inside of the limbs." I looked at the brush pile and didn't see anyone. Again I heard the odd voice call out, "If you do not see me, then you have not found me, and I will have won the game." I stepped closer and yelled out to the voice, "Why are you talking so funny?" The voice replied, "I am inside of all of the limbs. Look inside and you will see me, Daniel." Something felt really strange about the way this guy was talking, but 11-year-old me just rationalized it, thinking, maybe his voice sounds different behind the shrubbery and he sounds like he's talking funny because his voice sounds different. I stepped up to the edge of the brush pile and pulled the branches apart to look inside, and there was Daniel. His head was turned toward the top of the hill, but his body was facing me. I yelled out, "I caught you." His head shifted toward me, and he had the single most disgusting smile I've ever seen to this very day. Imagine if someone has the absolute worst of intentions and they're trying to hide behind a fake innocent smile to gain your trust, but they couldn't help their glee with the thought that they may have fooled you. That's the best way I can describe the smile. I was so shocked by this wicked facial expression on my cousin's face that I froze in place. The hairs on my neck and arms all raised, and I could suddenly feel my blood running through my body like the temperature had dropped inside my veins. I stammered through my words, How did you get in there?" He responded, "I fell into the inside of the limbs, cousin. I will need you to give me help, or I will continue to be trapped." I didn't notice this time how oddly he phrased his sentences, and it only occurred to me afterward that his lips were not moving when he spoke. He never changed his face from the twisted, unnerving smile. I didn't immediately notice any of these things because I was too distracted by the large stick that was plunged deeply into the side of his neck. I noticed in that moment that he had a slow, steady, trickling stream of blood flowing from the half-dollar-sized stick in his neck and down across his right shoulder and down his chest. That was enough to jolt my feet awake, and before my brain realized I was trying to run, I was already halfway up the hill to my grandmother's house. When I burst through the door to my grandmother's living room, Daniel was curled up in a ball on the couch and crying hysterically. My grandmother was sitting beside him, trying her best to get him to explain what was wrong, but all he would say is that there was a little boy in the woods who tagged him when he was hiding, and he thought it wasn't really me. He wouldn't say anything else. I was crying and shaken up by this point and told my grandmother what I had seen. She made both of us some lunch and then called my uncle to come pick Daniel up. I stayed at my grandmother's house that night, and I bet she asked me what happened 100 times. She asked so many questions, it was as if she were committing it to memory. I remember being relieved that she believed me, but at the same time I just wanted her to tell me it was all in my imagination and help me forget about it. The next day, my grandmother set the brush pile on fire, and I watched for hours from the safety of the living room window as it slowly deteriorated into a pile of ash and ember. My cousin never did tell me what really happened to him that day. He refuses to talk about it. I will say this though, he wouldn't talk to me for a year and a half after that day. We were so close when we were little, but that event, whatever the hell it was, it drove a wedge between us that changed our relationship forever. When my son was 2 years old, he started acting as if he was interacting with something or someone that his father and I could never see, like throwing toys down the hallway and then running away murmuring words. When I asked what he was doing, he always told me that he was giving toys to the boy for him to play with. There was never anybody there, but it was always icy cold down that hallway and leading into the garage. I'd ask him what the boy's name was, and he would tell me Don was his name. I asked what the boy was doing, waiting for his mum to pick him up. He would always reply. We put it down to an imaginary friend and nothing more. Harmless, we thought, until he started waking up in the middle of the night screaming, "Don won't let me sleep, he keeps tickling my toes." This sent chills down my spine, and so my son would sleep in my bed with me every night. This continued for another 6 months until the real estate notified us that the owner of the house had died and his children would be selling the property and splitting the profit between them, meaning we had to move. After we left, I came across a local news article about the owner of our old rental stating how much he will be missed by the community. He had been raised by his mother in the house we were renting since he was a child. Then I noticed his name and everything came flooding back to me. His name was Don. My son's imaginary friend was our homeowner. He must have been waiting for his mother to come and take him to the other side. I'll never look at imaginary friends the same. Back in the 80s, my Aunt Kay was in her early 20s. This was before she married my uncle, and when she would drive long distances back and forth between her parents and my uncle's to visit. It was a transitional period for them. He had just graduated, and she hadn't moved out yet to be with him. It was a long drive across several states, through the desert, which took her hours. This desolate highway would have stretches of road that lasted hundreds of miles, where you quite often wouldn't see another driver, let alone a gas station. So Aunt Kay set out and began one of these journeys. A couple hours into the drive, Aunt Kay noticed a dark vehicle slowly catching up to her. She barely noticed as she continued to sing along to Les Miserables until the vehicle got aggressively close. She turned off the music and looked into her rear-view mirror, seeing the vehicle flash its brights and a hand pointing at her car and motioning to pull over. Alarmed, she quickly slowed and began to look for a good place to pull off the road to see what must be wrong with her car.
The second I began to pull off the road, I felt and heard as clear as day. Don't pull over. Then again, stronger. Don't pull over. Call it God, intuition, or just a gut feeling, but a jolt of adrenaline and fear shot through my body as I hit the gas and peeled back out onto the highway.
A heart pumping, Aunt Kay silently asked herself what the hell was that as she saw the vehicle peel out behind her. The dark vehicle continued to closely follow, flash their brights and motion to her to pull over. Fear and confusion set in as Aunt Kay began to question what was going on. Why was the driver motioning for her to pull over? Was there something wrong with her car? And what the hell was that warning she felt? It would have been a severe situation if her car broke down out there, especially before cell phones, but she pressed on. Just as her resolve wavered, she started questioning if she truly did feel what she felt. She started slowing back down when the dark vehicle picked up speed. It entered into the oncoming traffic lane and came level to my aunt's car. The driver smiled, pointed, motioned, and mouthed the words, "Pull over," to my aunt. The second I looked into his eyes, I felt pure evil. I felt a horribly sick feeling in the pit of my stomach and again heard the words in my head, "Don't pull over." She described him as looking scary, greasy, and noticed he was missing a couple of teeth in his smile that she'll never forget. That sent chills through her. This quickly dispelled any thoughts she had of pulling over, and she put the pedal to the metal to try to lose him. He chased after her. She slowed down, he slowed down, she sped up, he sped up. It got to the point that he began to try to push her car off the road. I was to the point of tears as this creep continued to terrorize me alone, out in the middle of nowhere. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Aunt Kay sees a couple of semis off in the distance. She felt if only she could get close or even get in between those trucks, she would be safe, so she took off. He continued to flash his lights, honk his horn, and try to hit her car until she got close enough to the trucks. As she got in between them, she saw the dark vehicle slow way down and eventually disappear from view. She stayed with the trucks for a couple hours until she felt safe enough to pull over at a gas station and cry. Fast forward several years. My aunt and uncle are married. He's working at a law firm as a high-profile criminal prosecutor in Las Vegas. She's now a full-time mom of several young children. Since I've known my aunt, she's been obsessed with true crime. Dateline, 2020ths, and Unsolved Mysteries were always playing at their house. This day was no different. She was folding laundry in the kitchen while listening to the TV in the other room. The interviewer was talking about a man who was being interviewed on death row. As she paired another match of socks, she heard the man describe one of his tactics for procuring victims. According to him, he would wait along the side of the highway. A car would go by with a family, and he'd wait. Another car with a male driver would go by, and he'd wait. But every so often, a car would go by with a pretty woman driving alone, so I'd pull out behind and follow him. I'd flash my brights, honk, and motion for him to pull over. Aunt Kay, paralyzed, continued to listen. When they would eventually pull over, I'd tell them to pop the hood, and I'd be able to tell them what was wrong with their car. They would, and I'd yank a couple wires. When the car wouldn't start, I'd tell them no problems. My buddy has a shop in the next town. I can give you a ride, and he'll give you a fair deal. My aunt slowly moved to the living room. They'd get in, and I'd rape and kill them, bury them anywhere in the desert. When asked how many times he did this, he responded, "They'll never find all the bodies, I can't even count." And how many got away? 2 or 3. My aunt stood alone, staring into the same toothless grin she saw on that highway that day. It was Henry Lee Lucas, thanks Charlie, TLDR. My aunt narrowly avoided being killed by a famous serial killer. I'll keep it long but informative. About 3 years ago, my friend and I, 17 and 16 at the time, were having a bonfire behind my barn. It was a perfect night, no wind, hoodie weather. The fire was gigantic and lit up all the surrounding area. We were screwing around having a good time and got the idea to walk about 500 feet down to check out my pond, as part of the water was illuminated from the fire. We walked down joking about a skinwalker or some humanoid creature coming out of my woods. Let me get this straight. For years and years, I've always told myself I want to see something, practically begging for something to happen so I can whip out my phone and record it. My friend always gets tensed up when I say anything about that stuff, so it's funny to me, especially since we were surrounded by woods in the middle of farmland country. We were down at the pond, and I see him kind of notice something shiny about 20 feet to our right. Yes, after all this, we measured everything. And I did too.
Hey, where'd that giant rock come from?
I looked and immediately knew it wasn't a rock or anything, as I just mowed the area a few hours prior. The only thing around us were 2 full-grown trees. We started walking towards it, and as we got closer, I kept saying,
"What the hell is that?
He starts freaking out, yelling.
What the hell is that?"
And I'm just in complete awe. By this point, I'm about 5 feet from it and weighing out what it could be. It wasn't a rock, wasn't a tree stump, nothing should be here. It was about 3 feet long, maybe 2 feet high, and it immediately hit me. This is something crouched down like in a fetal position. I made out the neck and the torso, wrinkled grayish skin, little white hairs. I said it one more time.
What is this thing?
And my friend screamed in straight terror, grabbed me and pulled me away. We both ran up to my house looking back, making sure it wasn't following. We ran in my house, told my mum, who obviously said,
Oh yeah?
I grabbed a flashlight and we got in my Civic and drove through the yard down to where it was. Headlights shined down and nothing was there. We drove all around through my woods and found nothing. The next morning we went back and found no prints. The only thing I wish I'd done was take out my phone. It was right there. Something was right there. When you're looking at something you know shouldn't be there, you don't have a thought. I never had one thought to pull out my phone. To this day, my friend and I still talk about it, wondering what it was. If you enjoyed these creepy stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more spine-chilling content. Hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest uploads. Thank you for watching. But before you go, let me share one last story that will keep you up at night. It was a stormy night, and the rain was pouring down relentlessly. I was home alone as my parents had gone out for the evening. The power had just gone out, and I was left in complete darkness. With only the sound of the rain and occasional thunder to keep me company, I decided to light some candles and make the best of the situation. As I sat in the dim candlelight, I heard a faint tapping at the window. At first, I brushed it off as the wind or the rain, but the tapping grew louder and more insistent. My heart began to race as I realized that the sound was too rhythmic to be natural. I gathered the courage to approach the window and peek through the curtains. To my horror, I saw a figure standing just outside, barely visible in the darkness. It was tall and gaunt, with long, spindly fingers that it used to tap on the glass. Its eyes were hollow and its mouth twisted into a sinister grin. Frozen in fear, I watched as the figure raised one of its skeletal fingers and pointed directly at me. I stumbled backward, knocking over a candle in my panic. The figure seemed to vanish as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me with only the sound of my own heavy breathing and the pounding of my heart. I spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner, clutching a flashlight and praying for the power to come back on. When my parents finally returned, I told them what had happened, but they dismissed it as a figment of my imagination. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that something was watching me that night, something that wanted to get inside. So remember, when you're alone in the dark and you hear a tap at the window, it might not be the wind. Stay safe, everyone, and until next time, sleep tight.